Hey, welcome to Spark. Our guests today are poet M.P. Carver and Elizabeth Gordon McKim.
Hi, welcome to Spark. We have taken the show on the road for this. It's exciting. We are in Elizabeth Gordon McKim's workspace. Elizabeth is one of our guests for this show. She's published 9 collections of her poetry as well as a teaching guide. She is a pioneer member of the Arts Institute for Expressive Therapy at Lesley University. Her new book, Elizabethridge, is a memoir of her collaboration with poet Etheridge Knight. We know her as the jazz poet of Lynn. Our other guest today is M.P. Carver, and one reason why we have them is because they've collaborated together on some of Elizabeth's work. MP is a poet and visual artist. She's the director of the Massachusetts Poetry Festival, a creative and digital writing teacher at Salem State University, and has received the E.E. Cummings Prize from the New England Poetry Club. And one thing I found out today just by looking out Elizabeth's window is that MP's license plate says poet. So she is a licensed poet, which is I think the first licensed poet we've ever spoken to.
Wow. So we have recognized by the Lynn government, the jazz poet, and by the Massachusetts State
Registry of Motor
we
Vehicles.
recognize. So we have some street cred with us today. Do you want to start, Neil, or you want me to start?
I think you should go right
okay,
ahead.
good. So the show is about the creative spirit, I guess, how you might find your inspiration or what happens when you do. So I'd like to start with you, Elizabeth. When you get an idea for a poem, what happens next?
Well, let's see. If an idea just pops in, right?
Yeah.
That's usually the way it comes to me. Like something comes in, it's just like a little charge. I usually either write it down if I have something available to write. I have many journals. I'm a journal keeper. Or if I'm at the computer, then I might write it on the computer, or I speak it out or sing it out and repeat it, because I am a poet of the oral tradition, which is our songs, stories, and poems, and also visual approximations, like you, visual, verbal.
Do you see the end when you begin, or is it just a process of getting to the finish line, and how do you know when you're finished?
Oh, that's good. No, I never see the end. I don't even think about the end, because I just try to be witness of what I am experiencing, and so I don't know what the end is. And with my many years of working with children, I found that to be true too. That they don't have a plan of where they're going.
Yeah.
And so I tried to work with this whole improvisatory concept about jumping on the poetry bus.
There you go.
Yeah.
So MP, just a similar question, but also as taking into account obviously that you're a poet and a visual artist, which I saw some of your things this morning. I was just looking at them, and gorgeous. Love the dollar bill and the person falling. A lot of capitalism. Anyway, I don't want to answer you, but so the same thing. Like, how do you begin, and how do you know when you're done in like painting and poetry?
Right. Well, so painting is a little bit easier because I am not a good painter by any stretch, and I haven't studied painting, so I have no like preconceived notion when I start a painting that it's going to be good on the other side. So I can just have some kind of fun and do whatever. And honestly, poetry, I try to do the same thing, but the difference is I have better judgment on the other side, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say very similar to Eliz. I think if you don't, you mentioned sort of not knowing where the end is, and I think that's the same thing usually in a poem, because you often sort of the best poems surprise us in some way, and So really, you have to start by surprising yourself, I think, to like find that moment. And a lot of times, like if an idea comes to you, it's like such a gift, and you have to like rush to write it down someplace or in some way. But a lot of times I'm not always inspired, so I'll sit down and try to think about something, often like another text or like a news article or some kind of theme, and just sort of mentally cast around and hope there's some idea for some connection I can make, or
So
some bit of language.
You set aside time, not just counting on the like, I'm driving, I'm inspired, pull over, pull over.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
set aside time to practice.
Yeah, I used to count on that, but I think as I got older, it got harder. I think I said all the things I really needed to say, and it's like, wait, I still need to write a poem. So, yeah,
I know there's something.
yeah. Although I'm not a particularly formal person. I'm not like, oh, it's Tuesday at 3, I need to sit down. But I'm a poet. I'm in the poetry world, and so if it's been a month since I've written a poem, we're starting to have a problem, right?
Yes.
And do you find that those are productive sessions when you sit down, you don't have a clear idea, but you find that that's worked for you?
Maybe 50% of the time.
That's awesome.
Which is enough, right? Like, which is
That's
enough
awesome.
to eventually. Sometimes I will sit down and it's just there's nothing. It's useless. But
Yeah. Now, Elizabeth, when you perform, a lot of times you perform with musicians.
Yes.
So you're taking a poem, incorporating music into it. Is it, say if you're playing with one musician and another musician, is it going to come out different, even though it's the same poem?
Absolutely. And also, my voice is dependent really on what I'm feeling of the moment. So it could be very quiet and tender, or it could be angry. Like I have a poem called Who the Hell Do You Think You Are? Which actually is a kind of a love poem.
Yeah.
And I could say it in a quiet way, and it would come out very different than if it comes out as a blues poem.
that's one of the great things about seeing your shows is that even if it's stuff you've performed before, every show is a little bit different. Sometimes in major ways with tone shifts and everything.
And this is the thing with MP, that we first met, especially around my story of origin, my creation story called Mud Matters in the First Circle. And you really heard it. You discovered it for yourself, that it was worth, that it was an interesting piece of writing and music, and that was where I performed that for the Mass Poetry, the very first time. And it was, I think then
2015, I think.
And right, and some of the people from Salem State were there to listen to it. And that Mud Matters in the First Circle, which has gone so many different changes depending upon our life and times. That also was performed in Israel. I did parts of it in Bali and India, locally here in Lynn, and it's a story of beginning and continuing, and it finds its ending. I mean, the ending
the times that we're in.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. While you're talking about your world travels, I'd like to talk to you both about like your teachers, right? You both teach creative writing. You're, really on the ground floor of Leslie's whole program, and now you're teaching at Salem State University. So how do you use your creativity or your spark or the joy of process to help other people find their voice? So go ahead.
Okay, so
MP, please.
that's a very good question, and it takes a lot of thought, really. But I usually start with a kind of body process to have the participants enter in. And with the children, graduate students, and everything, we start with a really simple little poem. And it goes like this: dee da da da, dee da 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 da. That's the way the poem begins. begins with me and you, and then you join me and you and us, and ride that poetry bus. And you have to reach sky now. Don't ask me why now. You bring it down to Middle Earth, and this is where you do some editing. You push, you pull, gather that wool, and you dig in dirt now, and it won't hurt now. So it gets into the embodiment with the rhythm and the pulse and the change and continuance and all these things. And it helps people just to enter in. And from there, you know, I will suggest a writing experience for them, or a singing, speaking. And that's how we begin. And then share what everybody who wants to has a chance to share what they're doing, and then that's generally how we begin, in this very simple way.
Yeah.
I'm always
Good
so
entry
surprised
point.
that this simple little poem, you know, has had its journeys.
You almost give them a prescribed way to let go of their inhibitions to get ready.
Yes.
In a way.
And I guess everybody has a different way. How do you get your people to?
Yeah. Well, I'm working with much older students. I'm not good with kids, so
Yeah.
I'm teaching college students.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
No babysitting here.
Yeah. But yeah, so my biggest thing is the readings. I try to bring in really like exciting readings, things that excited me, rather than things that illustrate, for example, like the ideal story structure, or things that illustrate, you know, like a classic sonnet with a turn. I try and bring in things that I bring in all contemporary work.
Very nice.
And I try and bring in things that I think maybe they'll be able to connect to without needing to have any background in like the art or anything like that.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I try to really stress to them is that the only difference between, I think sometimes there's this myth that creative people have this level of inspiration that other people don't have.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's maybe something to that, in that you have to want to write, right? So you have to feel like you have something to write about. But the difference between, I think, a great writer and just an okay writer is only time and reading, right? And so, you know, if you have just an idea that, like, I enjoy a poem, you know, the only difference between you and say Robert Pinsky, right, is time and learning, right?
Yeah.
That you can learn a lot of the things that poets do, and you too can do this if you want, right? If it serves you to do it, right? So.
How did you? I'm just gonna ask one more question, because I'm just like, how did you know you were a creative person?
Oh, well, I guess I always like to kind of have fun, and I guess put energy into things, right? Which I think is really a lot of what creativity is about. Is just about being invested in whatever you're doing enough to want to do something fun with it. But I'll tell. So I decided to be a poet in 2008. I think like November 2008, something like that.
You little spring chicken.
But the reason is I was studying East Asian studies in college, and I loved it. I adored it. And my plan was to go on to this program called the JET program.
Oh, yes.
You teach in Japan and then become some kind of translator or work for a corporate office or something. And I would have been, I think, really happy doing that. But I was abroad in Japan that fall and ended up getting very sick. And then in addition, we had the crash. So all of a sudden, I'm abroad in Japan. I've got all of these health issues that I wasn't able to address until I got back, and that took about a year. And I realized that I was not going to be able to stay there and do what I planned to do. And I was about to have this mountain of debt. So I said, if I can't do what I had planned on all this time, I'll do what makes me happy. I'm going to write poetry. now I've scraped my way through.
Well, you're doing a pretty good scrape.
Certainly anybody with debt should turn to poetry, right?
Oh, yeah.
That would be the way to, because you know, it's so lucrative.
Well, I think what you said, I also subscribe to, that you decided to do something that would bring you happiness as we know it. I mean, there's all different forms of happiness. Certainly poetry can also make you very pained and sorrowful and full of grief, but in a way that's our happiness.
Feeling the
that
truth.
that usefulness. And I always felt that even as a child, that writing and English, we always called it English, was
That's true.
that it was fun. You know, that it was, I didn't think of it as grades or anything. I did it because I enjoyed telling stories,
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah.
and I knew that I had a certain kind of talent for it.
Yeah.
So that was part of my happiness. And I also connected the different art forms from a also very early age. That, like, I loved all the jump rope songs and childhood chants and singing and all of that. And later on, it was dance, it was movement that really brought me into art. And strangely enough, it was ballet, which is a very formal kind of thing. But I would almost go into what Paul Sin always calls my trance state, you know, that I would enter into that zone. In jazz they call it the zone, you know, and it was like altered consciousness, and dance, movement. I wasn't very good at, you know, doing pirouettes and all that, but I was very good at improvising with the music. And I had a wonderful teacher back in Hartford, Connecticut, who had a studio, and she had a skeleton in her studio, and she made us, she wanted us to learn all the names of the bones.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the ballet class, we would have free dance, and that was it for me. And she knew it. I mean, she gave us report cards and everything. She was an Italian woman. She took it the ballet very seriously. So entering into her studio was like entering into a very special place. And then she wrote this note to my parents saying something like, she has rare creativity. Something like that. And that was like the hand on the shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, that was
for
saying,
sure.
yeah, she has something. And so
I see you.
that was
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
We interviewed poet Richard Martin, and one of the things he talks about is basketball. And he sometimes says that the feeling he gets playing basketball and the motion is the same feeling he gets when he's writing, and the motion of that. Is that what you're experiencing between dance and writing? Is
Yes.
you getting that same feeling
Yes.
when you're improvising or when you're writing?
Right, and that it was a different world than the kind of boring world that I feel. That it was like, yeah, something changed in my body.
Yeah.
And now they call it, you know, embodiment and all of this. But
Mindful, yeah.
I still, I still, I think, am a poet of embodiment. That's.
Before you ask another question, I have it's sort of a strange little question, but you know, when we were interviewing Gus and Henry and the other poets too, it's you know, the whole thing about kill your darlings, you know, it's like sometimes you have to take things out of poems. How long have you held on to a line and then went back and said, this is perfect for this? You know, like something you had to cut from another poem?
Yeah.
Like how long has it been able to stay with you? Or has that ever happened? That you love this line, it doesn't fit, you hate to cut it, but then it's like always in your backpack. And
Yeah,
it went 30
exactly.
years or like, so how many years? We want some numbers and names.
Oh, I'd say, let's see, I'm 85 now, so let's say it was like maybe, I don't know, gosh, maybe like 70 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
But I often will lop off, you know, the beginning lines that I write.
Yes.
And then also I work a lot with condensation, as you do, you know, like the haiku. You know, I know about condensation, and it's something that I've taught for a long time. So bringing things into, you like writing your head off and your heart out in the beginning and just doing it and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's only the beginning.
Yeah.
Then then you have to do your sleuthing. Then you have to find the poem.
Yep.
You know, and sometimes it's a one line. You know, sometimes it's a few words, or sometimes it's like you know, like a haiku, 3 lines.
Yeah.
So
70 years I've saved the word. No.
I know.
How about you? How long have you?
Actually, probably the most is maybe 5 years, something
Yeah.
like that. And it was a poem, a recent poem actually, that I had started it 5 years ago, and it just like wasn't working, but I could never forget it. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden this past summer, I figured out what to do with it. So
That's so
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
do you remember what the line was?
actually, it was like the whole first half of the poem actually. But it was a poem called "In the Parlor of the Blue Collar Language Club," and it started with the line, "We open up our pockets and find our mother's tongues twisted up in the lint," and then it goes on
that's
from
a
there.
beautiful line.
Yeah, so I
like
couldn't
that.
let it
No
go.
wonder-
Yeah, you know, you gotta keep that.
No wonder you
Yeah.
saved it all those
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
That's great. That's great. And in a way, if you want to look like you didn't save it, it was saving you.
Exactly.
That's
exactly
Whatever.
it.
But it's true.
But
It's
that's
true
it.
because you couldn't forget it for a reason.
Right.
That's
right.
what it was doing.
So I was wondering, once you decided you're going to be a poet, which is a, you know, bold declaration, you know.
It is, really.
What are some of the things that happened over the next couple of years or so that confirmed that in you and made you think, yeah, I made the right decision, I'm going down the right path? Because a lot of times people decide to do one thing and then they go back another way, but you've
Right.
continued.
Right. Well, honestly, too, at that time, there were no jobs anyways, so I couldn't find any other options. Like I had a degree from an Ivy League college. I'm working 13 hours a week at Barnes & Noble, living in like somebody's bunny room for $350 a month. Like, so.
What do you mean?
Yeah, they
What's a-
cleared out the
what's a
bunny. The
bunny
poor
room?
bunny had to move to the
A real
pantry.
bunny?
It was a real bunny. Charlie, I took his room.
You didn't have a bed of like sawdust or anything like that.
No, I
Shaving, wood
had
shaving.
I had some blankets on the floor.
Oh,
so,
Ricky.
but,
God.
You are a poet.
Yes.
yeah, right.
Is
So
that from Brown University?
that's after
Yeah.
Brown.
Oh my
Well, there were no
God.
jobs. Nobody had any jobs then, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I had no connections because I grew up poor, so I didn't know people who could help me in any
Yeah.
way. So, but anyway, so honestly, I think that helped because I think if I had at that time found a comfortable job and suddenly found myself living well, I might have given up. But as it is, I had just this one thing, and so I just bit by bit chipped away. Right, I was writing poems. I learned how to send them out. I got my
Oh
first
yes,
thing
me
published.
too.
And
I
then,
learned that.
yeah, but then the biggest thing was finding community,
Yeah.
which started for me first actually finding the Massachusetts Poetry Festival just by coincidence, seeing the banner downtown and then showing up, and then finding people there, and then going to Walnut Street, and then before you know it, poetry is your whole world.
I know.
Aren't you the director of it now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Don't give up those
Taking
dreams,
over.
kids.
Yes, that's right. From,
Do not.
from the bunny room
Yeah.
to the directorship in, just 15 years?
Yeah, not
A mere
bad,
15
not
years.
bad.
That's quite a trajectory.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, we can't get through this without asking you about your recent book and your
Thank you.
your time with Etheridge,
Mm-hmm.
his poetry, your work together, how your relationship. I guess I would just want to ask you to just why did you feel like you had to write that, and what is the joy that you've gotten from it? I'm sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a long time coming because Etheridge Knight died in in 1991, which was like 32 years ago now. He died in 1991, and I met him at the very end of the 70s. Yeah, meeting Etheridge was very important, and I met him in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was on my way to Little Rock, Arkansas to teach children, and my friend Fran Quinn from Worcester, he was going to teach high school. And so Fran said to me, well, if we're going all that way to Little Rock, we should definitely stop in Memphis and meet Etheridge Knight, who I had heard about from Worcester, because he was married to a woman who lived in Worcester. So anyway, that's how I first met Etheridge, and it turns out that Fran we were supposed to take the plane together to Memphis, and Fran left his poems back in Worcester. So in those days, you could take the next plane. So his mother came to Logan Airport and brought him back to Worcester. He picked up his poems. Meantime, I was on the plane going to Memphis, and so I said and Fran called me, I said, well, how am I supposed to know this guy? And he said, well, you'll know him. He's a big, tall, black guy with scars on his chin, and he'll be wearing a red Big Apple cap, and he'll be with a white boy about 10 years old, and he'll have a satchel full of poems, just like you.
Okay.
And so, you'll know each other.
We'll find him.
So that was easy. And then I heard Etheridge read one of my favorite poems, Idea of Ancestry. And I had never really heard anyone who read in such a resonant and deep way, and it just kind of blew me away, really. And then, a few years later, through the Robert Bly and the Great Mother Conference up on the coast of Maine, I saw Etheridge again, and at that time, then he wanted a reading in Boston, and so I planned a reading with the two Sams, Sam Allen and Sam Cornish, who were two wonderful black poets from our area. And so anyway, that was when Etheridge and I did get together. And so it was just a really important and kind of scary relationship, because Etheridge was an addict all of his life, which a lot of people think, well, he was always in recovery. Well, he was in rehab a lot, but he did struggle with drugs all of his life. And so that's also part of my, with my book, I talk about those things quite openly. And also just that it was a relationship of love, which Richard Hoffman wrote me a beautiful response to the book, and he recognized what the book was all about and the love that was there between me and Etheridge. So that was, I guess, the impetus over the years. I mean, look, that was Etheridge dying 32 years ago, and so the book is what I call a compendium. So it has essays, especially long one in the beginning, Freedom and Confinement, which MP really helped so much in all of this material, because she's an incomparable editor, really, and formatting the work. And so had that, and letters, and little drawings, and my poems. And I honestly think, this is another question that Tim Gager asked me, how much did you learn from Etheridge, and how much did he learn from you? Well, I personally think I learned more from Etheridge than he learned from me. I mean, it was more of a leap for me. And it wasn't that, there wasn't an equality of my life is equal to your life. There was always that, and respect, and also the fact that Etheridge always made an effort to, if he was reading somewhere, he always said, well, put Elizabeth up there. Her students are here to hear her. Because a lot of times people weren't that interested.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that, my leap was a bigger leap. Because just learning so much, well, I learned a lot about prison life. I learned about his community, which comprised his family, deep family, complicated family, and also, junkies and street people and all of that, and also poets, Robert Bly and Galway Canal and all those, and wonderful black poets like Terence Hayes and Joanne Reginald Betts and Yusef Komanyaka, and many poets. So there was always this sense of community that is so much important to you also, that to find your community. And Etheridge Knight, community revolved around him in a completely surprising way for me, that I had never really experienced the intimacy of that kind of community.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and we will link your website as well as yours, so that you can check out MP's work and Eliz's work. There's many more books than the latest ones, but so you'll be able to go and dig a little deeper in. Our next show with Eliz and MP will be them performing, so you'll have to come back to YouTube for that. But do you have any more questions, or
No,
did you want to?
I would like just to say one thing.
Yeah, please.
Excuse me, your son, Gus Zagarella, also was one of my big helpers.
Yeah.
And he learned about Etheridge Knight from me.
Did,
because
yes.
we would sit in that study, and I would tell him stories, and we would read poems, and he wrote a little thing about it, how he learned about this man named Etheridge Knight, and he learned, it was a very intimate kind of connection of, teacher and student,
Absolutely.
two writers, and also somehow I had this idea that Gus would be a good person to work on this material, and he was. Same way with you, that there was nobody that could have done what you did for me, MP, and I'm always grateful for it, honestly.
Well, I think we learned a lot about Etheridge from Gus and from you, and what a force, of poetry, and what a man, and through the publication of your book, more people get to see that relationship, get to see that, shall I say, spark.
Yes.
That was
Spark.
so cheap. That was so cheap. All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for letting us come to your house.
Yes.
Oh, my
it's just
pleasure.
absolutely
always.
wonderful.